These are the hillbilly comfort foods America once depended on, then forgot. Long before fast food and factory kitchens, families in the hills survived on meals built from cornmeal, garden scraps, smokehouse meat, and patience. These dishes were not trends. They were lifelines. Every recipe carried the weight of hard labor, long winters, and empty cupboards, yet they delivered warmth at the end of the day. As convenience reshaped how Americans cooked and ate, these foods vanished from tables and memory. What disappeared was more than flavor. A way of living faded with them. In this video, you will uncover 10 forgotten hillbilly comfort foods that once fed communities and shaped identity. Each dish reveals how families adapted, endured, and found comfort when resources were scarce. Watching to the end matters, because these meals explain a chapter of American history rarely taught, yet deeply felt by those who lived it. Cornbread and milk. Before refrigerators and grocery stores reached the hills, cornbread and milk was more than a meal. It was survival in a bowl. In Appalachian homes, corn was reliable when little else was. Families ground it by hand, baked it in cast iron, and made it last. When cupboards were thin and meat was scarce, this simple dish filled stomachs and quieted hunger. Cornbread was baked firm, never sweet, and often made from white cornmeal grown just outside the cabin. Once cooled, it was broken into chunks and dropped into a bowl. Fresh milk was poured over it, sometimes cold in summer, sometimes warmed by the stove in winter. For many families, that was supper. No garnish. No extras. Just what the land could give. This dish mattered because it required almost nothing. Cornmeal, milk, and a little salt were enough to feed children after long days of work and school. It was eaten slowly, often in silence, because food was respected. Elders believed wasting cornbread was wasting labor, land, and time. As store-bought bread and boxed cereals took over American kitchens, cornbread and milk was pushed aside. It came to be seen as poor food, something to forget rather than remember. Yet for generations it represented care. Mothers served it when money ran out. Grandparents remembered it as the taste of home during hard years. Cornbread and milk did not disappear because it lacked comfort. It vanished because life became easier, and its purpose was no longer understood. Remembering it matters, because it tells the truth about how families endured when choices were limited. This was not nostalgia. It was necessity, served warm, and shared with gratitude at the table. Fried cornmeal mush. Fried cornmeal mush was a food built for endurance, not attention. In hill country homes, it began as a pot of boiling water stirred slowly with cornmeal until thick. Salt was added, nothing more. Once cooked, the mush was poured into a pan, cooled, and left to set overnight. What looked plain became tomorrow's meal. In the morning, the hardened loaf was sliced and laid into a hot skillet greased with bacon fat or lard. The outside crisped, the inside stayed soft, and the smell filled small kitchens before sunrise. This was breakfast before farm work, logging, or long walks to school. It gave strength without waste. Fried cornmeal mush mattered because it stretched supplies. One pot could feed a family twice. It asked for patience, not money. Families relied on it during winters when gardens were bare and meat was limited. Some ate it savory, alongside beans or greens. Others added a drizzle of sorghum or molasses when they could spare it. Either way, it filled the gap between hunger and survival. As modern breakfasts replaced slow cooking, fried mush faded from memory. Packaged cereals promised speed and sweetness. Skillets were used less, and time was treated as more valuable than tradition. What was once common became unfamiliar. Yet this dish carried discipline and care. It taught children that food did not need excess to matter. Every slice represented foresight, thrift, and respect for effort. Fried cornmeal mush was never meant to impress. It was meant to last. Remembering it reveals how families endured through planning, restraint, and simple cooking that met real needs at the table. Poke salad. Before grocery aisles reached the mountains, poke salad was a lesson learned early. It was not gathered for taste. It was gathered because spring hunger was real, and the land offered little else. Families walked fence lines and creek banks searching for young poke leaves, knowing the plant could harm if cooked wrong. Poke salad required knowledge passed carefully between generations. Only tender shoots were picked. They were boiled, drained, then boiled again, sometimes 3 times, until the bitterness faded and danger passed. Once safe, the greens were chopped and fried with bacon grease, onions, or eggs. What remained was earthy, filling, and earned. This dish mattered because it turned risk into nourishment. In poor hill communities, store food was distant and money was scarce. Poke salad arrived every spring without planting or cost. It filled plates when winter stores were gone and gardens were not ready. Eating it meant trusting elders and respecting instruction. Over time, that knowledge thinned. As supermarkets expanded, wild greens were labeled weeds. Fear replaced familiarity. Poke salad slipped from daily cooking into folklore, remembered more as a warning than a meal. Yet for those who lived it, poke salad represented survival guided by wisdom. It was proof that food was not only bought. It was learned. Remembering this dish matters because it shows how families depended on memory, caution, and shared skill to endure another season. It also shaped identity in the hills. Children learned where to gather and when to stop. Mistakes carried consequences. That seriousness created respect for food and place. When poke salad vanished, a quiet education vanished with it. What remained was convenience, but less connection to land, patience, and inherited judgment. This loss changed how survival stories were remembered and who was trusted to teach them across generations today. Soup, beans, and fatback. Soup, beans, and fatback was the backbone of hill country cooking. It was not a special dish. It was the dish. When families spoke of supper, this is what they meant. Pinto beans simmered slowly in a pot while a strip of salt-cured pork rendered flavor and strength into every spoonful. The beans were soaked overnight, then cooked low and steady for hours. Fatback, sliced thick, was dropped in whole or fried first for deeper taste. Nothing was rushed. The pot stayed on the stove all day, filling the house with a smell that meant food was coming, no matter how hard the day had been. This meal mattered because it fed many with little. Beans were cheap, filling, and easy to store through winter. Fatback lasted when fresh meat did not. Together, they provided protein, warmth, and reassurance. Cornbread usually sat nearby, used to soak up the broth so nothing was wasted. Soup, beans, and fatback was eaten after farm work, logging, and mining. It restored energy and steadied families who lived close to the edge. Children grew up knowing this taste as normal, dependable, and necessary. As American diets shifted toward packaged meals and meat-heavy plates, this dish lost status. It was labeled poor food and slowly left behind. What vanished was not only a recipe, but a rhythm of cooking that valued time, patience, and sharing. Remembering soup, beans, and fatback matters because it explains how families endured without excess. It shows how comfort came from consistency rather than variety. This meal asked for almost nothing, yet delivered enough to keep households standing through long seasons of work, worry, and waiting at the table together. Leather britches. Leather britches were not a novelty. They were insurance. In mountain homes, green beans were picked at peak season, strung on thread, and hung from rafters to dry. By winter, they had shriveled into tough strips that could last months without spoilage. When snow closed roads and gardens slept, those dried beans were soaked overnight, then simmered for hours. A piece of fatback or ham bone joined the pot, returning flavor and strength to what had been preserved. The beans softened, darkened, and filled the kitchen with a deep, smoky smell that promised supper. This dish mattered because it defeated scarcity. Drying beans required foresight during abundance and patience during hunger. Families planned ahead, knowing winter would test them. Leather britches turned summer labor into winter meals, stretching meat and keeping children fed when stores were distant. Eating them was an event. The texture was firm, the taste concentrated, and the broth rich. Cornbread was expected, not optional. It caught every drop because wasting food meant wasting months of work. As freezers and canned goods became common, drying beans faded. Convenience replaced rafters lined with strings. The skill was no longer taught, and the name itself sounded strange to later ears. Remembering leather britches matters because it reveals how survival relied on preparation rather than purchase. It shows how families respected seasons, planned together, and trusted simple methods refined over generations. This was not poverty cuisine. It was practical knowledge earned through experience and shared at a table where planning meant survival. It also carried quiet pride. Visitors might not understand it, but locals did. Serving leather britches meant the household planned ahead and endured. That message mattered. It told children that patience fed families, and that effort today protected tomorrow during long winters when cupboards ran thin and hope. Chowchow was not just a side dish. In hill country homes, it was a necessity that transformed surplus into sustenance. Families harvested beans, cabbage, cucumbers, and peppers, chopping everything finely and packing it in jars with vinegar, salt, and a pinch of sugar. The jars sat on shelves, preserved for months when fresh vegetables were scarce. This pickled relish mattered because it added variety and flavor to otherwise simple meals. Cornbread, fried mush, or boiled potatoes could taste new when a spoonful of chowchow brightened the plate. It required no refrigeration, and it preserved the harvest at its peak, saving food that would otherwise spoil. Preparation was communal. Children helped chop, adults stirred the boiling vinegar, and jars were packed tightly with care. Each step carried importance. Underpacked jars risked spoilage, overpacked jars risked cracking. Families relied on knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Mistakes could mean wasted food, so attention mattered. As canned goods and supermarkets became accessible, Chowchow slowly disappeared. It was easier to buy pickles than preserve hundreds of jars. Recipes were forgotten, shelves emptied, and skills vanished. Yet, for those who lived with it, Chowchow represented foresight, thrift, and the joy of summer's bounty preserved through winter. Remembering Chowchow matters because it reveals how families stretched resources, respected the harvest, and connected through shared work. This was not decorative food, it was essential. It flavored meals, carried labor across months, and reminded everyone at the table that preservation was survival, patience was skill, and simple ingredients could provide comfort long after the garden had gone dormant. Chowchow shows that hillbilly kitchens were not about abundance. They were about making the most of what existed and creating lasting sustenance from the simplest offerings of the land. Biscuits and sausage gravy. Biscuits and sausage gravy was a hillbilly breakfast built to satisfy both hunger and hard work. In homes without refrigeration, fresh ingredients were scarce, so families relied on simple staples: flour, lard, milk, and salt for biscuits, and cured or fresh sausage for the gravy. Every morning, the dough was mixed by hand, rolled thin, and cut with a jar lid or knife. Biscuits baked in a hot cast iron skillet or oven until golden, while sausage sizzled, releasing fat that became the base for the rich, creamy gravy. This dish mattered because it turned humble ingredients into a filling, high-energy meal. Farmers, loggers, and laborers needed calories to endure long days. Biscuits provided structure, the gravy added protein and warmth. No spice or luxury was necessary. The flavor came from technique, timing, and quality of ingredients. Each bite sustained families and demonstrated care in preparation, even when resources were limited. Eating biscuits and sausage gravy was also about rhythm. Mothers prepared breakfast early, children ate quickly, and fathers often left before sunrise. The meal taught patience, as biscuits cooled just enough to be handled, and the gravy thickened slowly. The dish became a marker of routine, a ritual that grounded households during unpredictable seasons. As modern convenience foods gained popularity, biscuits and gravy declined in regular consumption. Cereal and prepackaged breakfast items offered speed over tradition. Yet for generations who grew up with it, the dish symbolized comfort, resilience, and community. It reminded families that even modest kitchens could produce warmth and nourishment. Remembering biscuits and sausage gravy matters because it illustrates how hillbilly kitchens transformed necessity into satisfaction. This meal tells a story of labor, endurance, and ingenuity. Its absence in modern diets shows not loss of flavor alone, but a fading connection to how families historically prepared, planned, and cherished food at the start of each challenging day. Slaw dogs. Slaw dogs were a hillbilly innovation long before fast food redefined hot dogs. In rural communities, fresh meat was limited, and families relied on preserved sausages, sometimes smoked, sometimes boiled. The hot dog itself was humble, but when paired with tangy cabbage slaw, it became a complete, satisfying meal that stretched both flavor and resources. The slaw was simple: shredded cabbage, a splash of vinegar, a pinch of salt, and occasionally a little sugar or mustard if available. It was prepared fresh in the morning or the night before, ensuring it would be ready when the sausage came off the fire or stove. The combination balanced the richness of the meat with crisp acidity, transforming a small portion into a filling dish. Slaw dogs mattered because they maximized limited ingredients. Families could serve a hot, nutritious meal without relying on expensive cuts of meat. Children ate them at the table or outside after chores, and adults often returned to work with energy restored. Every slaw dog reflected resourcefulness, teaching that simplicity could still deliver satisfaction and comfort. As packaged foods and fast food chains spread, slaw dogs disappeared from household menus. The method of pairing preserved meat with fresh, homemade accompaniments was replaced by processed condiments and buns. What was once an everyday meal became a regional curiosity or festival treat. Remembering slaw dogs matters because it shows how hillbilly kitchens adapted to scarcity while maintaining flavor and practicality. It illustrates the creativity required to feed families during lean times. The dish also preserved cultural identity, linking generations through taste, texture, and routine. Slaw dogs were not about extravagance. They were about survival, ingenuity, and care. In every bite, families experienced sustenance, pride, and continuity, a quiet but profound comfort that modern kitchens rarely reproduce. Hoppin John. Hoppin John was a dish of luck and sustenance long before it became a New Year's tradition. In hill country homes, families combined black-eyed peas, rice, and a bit of pork to create a meal that could stretch over multiple days. Every pot carried protein, fiber, and flavor from ingredients that were inexpensive, easy to store, and abundant during the growing season. The black-eyed peas were soaked overnight, then simmered slowly with smoked or salt-cured pork until the beans absorbed deep, savory richness. Rice was cooked separately or added toward the end, softening as it absorbed the flavorful broth. Seasoning was simple: salt, pepper, and sometimes a pinch of hot pepper for those who could spare it. Hoppin John was never flashy, but it was nourishing, dependable, and filling. This dish mattered because it combined affordability with longevity. A single pot could feed a family of several for 2 or 3 meals. It demonstrated patience, as slow simmering drew out maximum flavor from minimal resources. It also carried tradition, often served with cornbread or greens, connecting generations through shared routines and stories. Over time, Hoppin John faded from daily hill country cooking. Supermarkets, canned beans, and boxed rice reduced the need for long preparation. Families replaced it with quicker, less labor-intensive meals. What disappeared was more than a recipe. It was an example of planning, resourcefulness, and communal care. Remembering Hoppin John matters because it reflects how families survived on ingenuity and seasonal harvests. It shows how simple ingredients, beans, rice, and pork, could transform into a dish that sustained, comforted, and brought households together. This meal was a quiet celebration of endurance, teaching lessons about thrift, patience, and respect for the work that produced every bite. In lost kitchens, Hoppin John once hopped from pot to plate, feeding both body and community alike. Johnny cakes. Johnny cakes were more than simple corn pancakes. They were survival on a griddle. In hill country kitchens, families relied on cornmeal, water, and salt to create a quick, portable, and filling meal. They were cooked on a hot griddle or skillet, turning golden brown with a crisp exterior and soft interior. Sometimes a little lard or butter was added, but often, simplicity ruled. This dish mattered because it transformed minimal ingredients into sustenance. Johnny cakes could be eaten alone, dipped in milk, or served alongside beans, greens, or smoked meats. They were especially important during winter or periods when stores were distant. Children could carry them to school, and adults could eat them before long days of work. Each bite delivered calories, warmth, and comfort. Preparation required skill. Too thick, and the center remained doughy. Too thin, and they burned before cooking through. Families learned by repetition, passing tips from parent to child. The result was predictable nourishment, but also a small ritual that marked morning or mealtime in the hills. As modern breads and breakfast items became accessible, Johnny cakes slowly disappeared from everyday cooking. The convenience of sliced bread and boxed cereals replaced the labor of mixing, shaping, and cooking on a griddle. What vanished was not only a recipe but also the rhythm of cooking that connected families with their land and ingredients. Remembering Johnny cakes matters because it reveals how hillbilly kitchens thrived on ingenuity, resourcefulness, and care. They were not indulgent, they were essential. This dish carried history, showing how families sustained themselves with what they had and created comfort from simplicity. In each golden pancake, there was nourishment, heritage, and a quiet pride that modern kitchens rarely replicate. Johnny cakes fed bodies, hearts, and traditions alike.